WIPO has to lead this longer term change. And I want to very strongly endorse the suggestion that's been made by the Director General that in the context of this longer term inquiry, WIPO needs to support something like a blue sky commission, a group that has the freedom to think about what architecture for copyright makes sense in the digital age, freed from the current implementation of copyright, which we inherited from the analog stage of culture. Now, my own view is that this conclusion of this commission would have certain recommendations for elements to any copyright system. Number one, that the system be simple. If copyright is going to regulate 15-year-olds, it must be something that 15-year-olds can understand. Right now, they don't. Indeed, no one understands the full reach or complexity of copyright law. It needs to be remade to make it simple, and it can be remade to be made simple if that were an objective of the reform. Number two, it needs to be efficient. Copyright is a property system, but it is also the most inefficient property system known to man. The simplest idea of a property system, to know who owns what. Under the current system, we can't know who owns what, because the system has been architected to give up the infrastructure necessary to know who owns what. And the only remedy to address this problem is to go forward to a modern version of formalities, not at the moment of creation, but at least to maintain the rights under copyright. And in this respect, I'm happy to acknowledge that the RIAA and I agree about the importance of formalities in a digital architecture for copyright in the 21st century. They have expressly endorsed the idea of considering formalities as a way to deal with the efficiency of copyright, and I think that suggestion is absolutely right. Number three, the law has to be targeted. It needs to regulate selectively. So if we think about the difference between taking whole copies of another person's work and remixing that work, and the difference between the professional and the amateur, I apologize, I'm an academic, I can't help but think in matrices like this. We have a matrix like this, and copyright now presumes to regulate all of these spaces. But that presumption makes no sense. Copyright, of course, needs to regulate effectively and efficiently to stop professionals from pirating copies of other people's copyrighted work. That needs to be regulated as the core area of copyright's regulation. But just as obviously, amateurs remixing other people's work should be free of copyright's regulation. Not fair use, but free use. There should be a presumption that such use is outside of the reach of copyright, and that presumption should guide and encourage this amateur building upon our cultural past. And then in the middle, there are cases that are more mixed and more complicated, where the law needs to carefully figure out how to assure that the incentives are protected while the freedoms are assured. But the point about this model is to see that the objective needs to be to deregulate a significant space of culture relative to the current architecture of copyright and to focus regulation where it can do some good. Number four, the law must be effective. It must actually work in the sense of it getting artists paid. And as any artist will tell you, the current system of copyright doesn't actually do that well. And finally, number five, it needs to be realistic about the capacity of law to regulate human behavior. You think about the problem of peer-to-peer file sharing internationally, what people refer to as, quote, piracy. We're just after a decade into this war, a war which has totally failed if the objective has been to eliminate copyright, quote, piracy.